The first one is that toxins accumulate in the body over time. They're cumulative, right? So you're right. It's not one exposure or another. It's not that people who eat organic all the time will not get dementia, but we each have our own body burden, sort of a level that we reach where the body can no longer find ways to do workarounds with the toxins.
Welcome, Lisa. I'm so glad you're here with us. Lisa, you and I go way back, so I'm excited to have you here on Her Story on a Plate. And specifically, Jenny and I wanted to invite you on because your expertise is in the journey of our relationship with our brain. And one of the things, obviously, we talk about a lot is our relationship with our body, our relationship with food. And what's come up in this conversation with many women is, yeah, and what about our brain? And as we age, our brain is changing and our sense of confidence in our thinking is changing. So I'm excited to dive into this conversation.
As am I.
Yay.
Well, then I am too.
You
Okay.
are too. So
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you would just start by telling us, how did you end up in this world of brain health?
It was by accident, really. I became a health and wellness coach in 2002 and worked through the aughts, doing workshops and seeing clients. At the same time, since the late 90s, actually the earlier in the 90s through the current day, I've been on the board or volunteer at a nursing home and rehabilitation facility. So I volunteered with elders, especially those with Alzheimer's, very comfortable around elders. And when I first heard at a networking meeting in late 2011 that there were stories of people who had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and who had been able to regain their cognition because the actual cause was identified, then something really clicked for me. And there were a few of us at that meeting. And I'll have to say, the others really had family members with dementia at one time or another, but my dad had not yet been diagnosed, although he was subsequently diagnosed with
Yes.
Lewy body dementia. But just my work, in the elder care world and my work as a health coach, it became, so obvious to me that there had to be reasons why some people got Alzheimer's or other dementias and other people didn't. So that's how I got into it. I was one of the founders of Sharp Again here in New York, and it's been 12 years. People thought at the beginning we were crazy to even suggest that memory loss could be reversed or treated. And today, I think it's becoming much more accepted that this is the case. And we also understand the causes better. As they've come out, as there's been more research, especially around things like hormones and toxins and trauma, we really understand why these things lead to memory loss and why they're so important to address.
I think probably all of us have had this touch our lives in some way, right? And one of the things that I have found is that there are people who are wrongly diagnosed with some form of dementia when it's much simpler things to start with, like, are they severely dehydrated? Do they have a urinary tract infection? I mean, simple things first, where it looks like there's been this sharp change, and it turns out that could be part of the cause. I don't know if you've come across that.
Of course, those things, as well as heavy metal, mercury toxicity, almost exactly the symptoms mirror Alzheimer's.
You can imagine, and I totally get this. I mean, my career in doing what I do now was preceded by being a business consultant in the integrative medical world. We didn't call it integrative then, it had other names, right? But I understand this, and you can imagine there are some who would say, "Oh, sure, so the fillings in my teeth gave me dementia." Well, maybe, right? We don't know. Mercury really does have an impact. There are other heavy metals that do. There are those who would say, well, but certain people have access to a certain level of healthcare and others don't. So for those of us who don't, too bad on us, we're just going to age badly. I think that's an important thing for us to talk about. How does one get themselves educated, and how does one try to make the best choices they can without feeling that it's being driven by something that's a moral code or something that is perhaps steeped in diet culture? I mean, the two can coexist. That's what I'm getting at.
They certainly can. I think that if you look at the lifestyle factors that impact brain health, they also impact overall health. So they're things like nutrition, exercise, stress, sleep, mental stimulation, and social interaction. So all of those things are accessible to everyone. And the Sharp Again website has information and on those things, and we do lots of webinars, lots of presentations.
How did you come up with the name Sharp Again? It's very catchy.
It's good. It's really good.
Our initial full name was Sharp Again naturally, but, as companies over the last 10 years have started shortening their names, I think we felt Sharp Again said it all, and our website was always Sharp Again. And interestingly, I just read today that people who are genetically predisposed to Alzheimer's because they may have one or two copies of the ApoE4 gene,
Yep.
that they have discovered how in some people that gene gets kind of either shut down or changed in some way so that the person doesn't actually end up with Alzheimer's disease, and they've been able to isolate this reaction, and there's a drug that will do the same thing.
Mhm.
And so, what I think, to what you said earlier, Jenny, I wanted to just say everyone is different. Our genetics are different, our biology is different. There are a lot of people who didn't want to know their ApoE4 status because there was nothing you could do, and that was true for a long time.
Sure.
But today, even before what I just shared with you with this new drug that's being tested, even before that, there are people with two copies of the ApoE4 gene. It's like an allele, right? It's a gene with this 4 allele at the end. They, knowing their biochemistry, they can take steps now to significantly delay, if not totally prevent, getting dementia or Alzheimer's. I really understand the fear, especially if you have Alzheimer's in your family, of not, quote unquote, wanting to go there and not wanting to know. But if you have the information, it really can, guide you to take steps today in your 30s, your 40s. I mean, and get way ahead of
I'll
this.
give you a perfect example of this. So I know a family that's very close to us where both parents ultimately died of Alzheimer's at young age, really relatively young ages, in their early 70s. And their children are polar opposite ideas about this. So one got tested, found out what she found out, and she's, sort of really very active in trying to improve her brain health in the hope that, I mean, she knows there's no guarantee, right? But in the hope that she can either delay, slow, or reverse that process. Her sibling has chosen not to get tested, wants nothing to do with it at all, living his life exactly as he wants to live it. because there's this belief, just a personal belief of his, right? That knowing if in fact that he's got, the gene, that he will create a self-fulfilling prophecy, that he will spend the next several decades worrying when it's going to happen. Of course, if it was me, not knowing, I would spend the next several decades wondering if it was going to happen. But okay. So, people approach this very differently. But I think the point that you make about the different things that affect brain health are important. I'd love to talk about sleep because so many of us, including me, do not get enough sleep. And I think it has such an impact on overall brain health. And I think it makes us more vulnerable to brain disease. I mean, has that been your experience? Is that what you find at propaganda?
Absolutely true. Also, sleep impacts other aspects of our health and our lives. It's related to insulin resistance. It's related to, you know, the inability to lose weight for some people. It really can interfere with a lot of body processes. So, again, sleep, not being able to sleep well has many causes.
For sure.
Some of them are behavioral and lifestyle driven and habit driven. Some of them are structural. There's a narrowing of the airway. There's sleep apnea. There's snoring of either you or your partner. There are reasons, again, why people don't sleep well. But if that's the case, I can really say that addressing sleep issues is is important. It's really huge and it's easy in a way. Like you can go and get an at-home sleep test, which will show how you're sleeping and how much you're waking up during the night and if you're gasping for breath. And even a 3D cone beam x-ray that many dentists have will clearly show your airway and whether it's a normal size, if it's slightly narrowed. I mean, I even have a slightly narrowed airway. So I've always felt that having the information and the knowledge is helpful. The one thing I'll say about dementia and memory loss is that it is age related in terms of we know it's an older person's disease typically, although people are suffering at earlier and earlier ages. Part of that is because we have a lot of environmental effects like toxins that we're being exposed to.
You realize that as we say that, right? There are those who are listening and saying, "Oh God, yes, of course." And there are those listening and saying, "That's not true. There's always been factories, there's always been businesses, there's always been that." And I actually do believe that the longer we live, the longer we become even more and more and more productive, the more toxins that we are exposed to. And I'm hoping that just the whole issue of climate change will generate some changes that will eventually also affect brain health, in the future for many of
And
us.
there are actually 2 points to make with regard to that. The first one is that toxins accumulate in the body over time. They're cumulative, right? So you're right. It's not one exposure or another. It's not that people who eat organic all the time will not get dementia, but we each have our own body burden, sort of a level that we reach where the body can no longer find ways to do workarounds with the toxins. The second thing is that our genetics play a big role. And some people there are examples of people who smoke their whole lives and never get lung cancer and, you know, they live to a ripe old age. But a lot of that has to do with their genetics. And so, again, knowing what your genetics are and where you might have some mutations Like there's a mutation called MTHFR, which has to do with methylation. It really tells you how well you're processing those toxins. And 30% of the population supposedly has that mutation,
Affectionately known as the mother effer gene.
the mother
Mhm.
effer gene.
Yeah.
And so if you know that though,
Mhm.
you can take steps to have a multivitamin that has the methylated form of, let's say, B12. There are workarounds, but you have to you have to know up front to be able to do the workarounds. And there's a third thing which is sort of related to this, which is, look, we all get very set in our habits, and as we get older, we get more set in our ways, and it's harder for an 80-year-old to make lifestyle changes than it is for a 40 or 50 or even 60-year-old. So part of this, I'm talking about this timeline because I think where brain health is concerned, it's critical really.
However, I would say that there is neuroplasticity in the brain until we take our last breath. And so we all have the ability to learn, genetics aside for the moment, right? We have the ability to learn. And I think one of the key factors is, what's our motivation? What drives the need to do some things differently if that's what we choose? You look like you wanted to say something. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the big if we zoom out to the whole conversation that we're having is really about how is our relationship with our brain and our sense of agency around brain health. Jenny, you and I have talked a lot about how are we in relationship to our body, our size, our food. But what we're talking about here is how are we in relationship with our brain and what do we know about ourselves? What do we know about our genetics? What do we know about our tendencies? What do we know about, how much our parents worked, next to a river that was a dumping ground for a factory and we grew up right there, right? What is the relationship and the knowledge we have? And then how much agency do we feel like we have in this relationship? Right? If we feel like, you know what, it's just the way it is. Everybody died when they were, in their 40s because of the factory and because everybody got dementia. This is just the way it is. A little bit, Jenny, like you're talking about that one sibling who's like, ta da, this is the way it is. Or do we feel like, you know what? A little bit to what you're speaking about, Lisa. I have agency. I can change. And yes, I watch my mom who's 92, and I'm like, Mom, let's really work on stairs right now because we're going to somewhere with a lot of stairs. And she's like, well, you don't really need to do that many stairs these days. I'm like, right? So she's got a certain way that she's developed her habits. And how do you, Jenny, to your point, stretch that, right? Move into our neuroplasticity such that we can change and feel like we do have agency, not from a place of pressure like we should, but from a place of I want to. I want to be engaged in life. I want to be engaged with my brain. I want to do what I can. I want to be an ally to myself.
I love that expression, being an ally to yourself. I'm sure, Lisa, you have found that in your work that you're going to get more results from people that feel allyship, not only to themselves, but in their worlds. How do they get cooperation for the things that they want to accomplish? I want to talk about also this idea of body movement. See, in the world we come from, exercise has sort of a morality attached to it. Like, you should, and if you don't, you're just less of a person, and what's the matter with you? And, you're a lazy so and so. But there is this idea that body movement really does impact longevity if you're able to do it. And I'm assuming brain health. I mean, is that what you're finding in your work?
So the interesting thing about exercise, because people ask me, well, if I just do one thing, because they don't like to commit to a lot, what would you recommend? And I say, exercise helps so many of the other causes of memory loss that it is, I'm not saying a panacea, but it really is the most bang for your buck. So, the first thing is that exercise helps the brain with brain derived neurotrophic factor, which is really critical for memory.
Can you use that word for us a little more slowly? What is that?
Sure, it's BDNF, brain derived neurotrophic factor. And your body naturally makes it when you exercise. So you're giving your brain a real gift every time you exercise. When you exercise, your body will be more tired for sleep. So usually exercise not within 2 hours of going to sleep, but earlier in the day typically or will aid in sleep. Exercise reduces stress. Stress is also one of the risk factors for dementia, especially kind of, ongoing prolonged stress.
I wanna touch on that. That's a very important factor, isn't it, right?
Yes.
Stress, and the word that we use, stress, is in some ways a perception, isn't it, right? It's how somebody perceives their life. There are physical stressors, right? And there are we'll call them emotional stressors slash
Mhm.
life stressors, right? And you can take 2 people and put them into the exact same life, and some see it one way and some see it another way. So some of it I think has to do with how do you develop support systems as you if you need them, and do you allow yourself to do that? And part of it is also, do you trust yourself? Do you trust yourself to be able to manage parts of your life? And just the idea that you feel like you can trust yourself does in fact reduce some people's stress. And there are people that just need stress management techniques. Like they need ways to literally calm their neurobiology down so that they're not
Yes.
always in this constant state of fight or flight or flee. I mean, I don't think people really understand how often they're in that state and what it means hormonally and neurobiologically and in every other way.
You make some very good points, and what you're also showing is how interrelated everything is. So, I would say that exercise helps to regulate your hormones. And for those people who don't know, there's a direct relationship between the gut microbiome and the brain through the vagus nerve that goes right from the gut right up to the brain. So, your immune system is significantly impacted by your gut health. And both of those things impact the brain because everyone has heard of inflammation. And, we all know about like specific inflammation, like if you get a cut and the body rushes to heal that and seal it, and
Sure.
you get a scab and it heals. But if we have internal inflammation going on because we have an underlying infection like Lyme's disease or a UTI you mentioned earlier, or
Even allergies. Even allergies will cause
allergies
inflammation.
are a
Yeah,
part of that. Yes. So there's a lot that has to do with the head, oral health. The bacteria from the mouth has been found in the brains of Alzheimer's patients. So again, everything is interrelated. And that's why paying attention to one's overall health is important because all of these things impact the other. But I do think that, like, for example, we were talking about, hormones and, you know, women especially as we age, our hormones fluctuate significantly. Men's do too, but not at the same level.
I have no idea what you're
I
talking about. Sweat? Me?
So
Just a
No.
tad, just a tad.
I think, like, people ask me a lot about perimenopause and menopause, and I can't think straight and what's happening to me. And, there are 2 things that I would say about that. One is that typically your your memory does come back and to a very good level. You may go through a period where you feel like you've lost your mind and you
Yes.
can't, remember things. The second thing is that we found that doing no hormone replacement therapy through the skin, transdermal, starting at menopause, or, you would have to talk to your doctor about when, but it seems to alleviate not only some of the symptoms of menopause, but also keep the brain functioning better. So that's something that Dr. Bredesen, who's done a lot of the research in this area, has found among other things.
One of the things that I want to again zoom out to, because it's so many things, right, are connected to us taking care of our brains, and that we can go, wow, this is a lot, this feels overwhelming. It again starts to feel in our land of, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. Like, I can't do all these things. Is to remember that we actually care for ourselves better within community, that when we're not trying to do it ourselves, right? When you're like, movement is so important. Well, I know that I'm a swimmer, me getting to go to the pool is not going to happen all by myself. I tend to meet somebody. And Sharp Again is created a community, right? So that you can join other people who have prioritized this relationship with their brain health. And in all these areas where, because I just don't want people who are listening to go away feeling, oh, now I have another huge list of to-dos, and I should be. And what that does is actually squash our own sense of agency and sense of allyship and sense of support of our own self. And what I want to do instead is say, there are resources, there are other people there. Lisa, there's your organization.
We have a coaching program of like 6 to 8 people who work with a health coach on just the lifestyle issues. Because what we found is, if you can get your arms around some of your lifestyle habits that could just use a little tweaking and improvement, it elevates your overall health. So, yes, I agree with you. And the other like the other like extreme of that is what we learned, especially through COVID, is that social isolation is really a, you know, it's a hallmark of Alzheimer's. Like, people need community, they need social relationships, they need social interaction. I agree with you about exercise. I think it's so much more fun to
Mhm.
do it in community if it's possible, at your local Y or with one other friend. And that's true of many things.
There's a wonderful book that I recently read called Outlive. Yeah, and there's parts of it I could live without, but mostly what I came away with is 2 of the biggest factors that not only lead to brain health, but lead to, hopefully, longevity unless you get hit by a bus, is community, right, and sleep. Those were, like, the 2 biggies first. Then, there are other lifestyle changes that may or may not have an impact, right? But community is a very big, important thing. And I think part of it is that when you are engaged, doing things that you naturally love, if you have the privilege of being able to do some things that you love to do, you're kind of almost too busy to die. And when it comes to, when it
I love
comes
that. Too
to,
busy to die.
yes, I'm
That's
too
my
busy.
mother.
It's not in my schedule this year. Okay.
It's
But
totally my mom.
but the other thing too is when you're in community, you know that you have supports around you, and hopefully you have people who will gently let you know if they're seeing some shift, or they will help you make some shifts if you need to make them. I can't emphasize this point enough. And, for some, it's very hard to be in community. There are people with very introverted personalities. They're very
Social anxiety.
neurodiverse, yes, and they just can't bring themselves to sort of making friends, right? But there are also communities of people just like that. So it's really
Mhm.
just sort of making that an entryway so that you can have, and yes, there's environmental shifts. There's this idea, I'm sure, Lisa, you've come upon this, of epigenetics, right? And it's very controversial. But the idea, how I understand it in very simplistic terms, is that there are lots of things that we may be, we'll say, predisposed to, but nothing is fated. And then there are things that will flip the switch that make them happen in some and make them not happen in others. And I think that's really what we're talking about. Is it a chronic lack of sleep? Is it, lack of some form of body movement? Is it lack of, by the way, brain stimulation, right? Do you get to do things that stimulate your thinking and your being and your soul? Whether it's social, whether it's, reading, whatever it may be. And of course, really just resting and moving the body, hopefully not doing them both at the same time, but resting and moving the body. So I'm being cautious here because I wouldn't want people to think that their job is to just wait and see if it happens. There is a piece to that. It either will or it won't. But there's this idea of how can I simply come away with an idea to just engage in my life perhaps a little differently or perhaps a little more if I choose.
I guess I don't agree with the either it'll happen or it won't, because you talked earlier about agency. And I think that, look, no one has a crystal ball, right, with the way the rest of their life will look. But if your habits and your lifestyle can, there's so many ways I want to go with this. So if they can improve the odds that you will live a healthy, longer life, then, it might be worth the trouble and the time to pay attention to those things. You talked about epigenetics. Epigenetics trumps genetics, hands down. We have lots of ways to impact our genetics. And you're right, the genes get turned on, they get turned off. Some of the things that are causes of that are stress, as you mentioned, or trauma,
Yes.
infections like COVID. I think COVID really did a number on a lot of people's genetics. And, hormones can do that, lack of sleep. Many of the things we've talked about today can impact our genetics. Again, which is why it's to get help with some of those things that are, I call, the low-hanging fruit. It makes sense. And again, we also talked about your why. Like, why would this be important to you? You want to stay potentially engaged with friends, engaged with families, activities, causes that are meaningful to you. Whatever your why, whatever that is, I believe that's the driver of whether you're 50 or you're 85 and you want to make those years last long and well. And we do talk about health span versus lifespan, because you don't want to live the last 10 or 15 years of your life unhealthy and on lots of medications necessarily. And when you aren't well, it does curtail how much you want to engage in activity with other people, with causes that you may care about. But so your health does drive your mental state,
And vice versa.
and vice
Right.
versa.
There are
Exactly.
folks that certainly all three of us probably work with where the first order of business is depression
Yes.
because it's multifactorial. It's a very long conversation, right? But Depression will affect one in terms of their own neurobiology, their motivation, just the lens in which they see life. Maybe they don't actually want to live that long because life doesn't look that exciting, right? So I think depression is something that is not talked about enough by most folks, and there's an undercurrent of it for so many people.
And it's a risk factor for dementia as well.
So I want to wrap us up, and I think the
Thank God
thing
for
that we
Nina. She
keep
keeps bringing us back to the meta. Thank you.
the thing that I keep hearing is the sense of, how do we want to live? And what is the agency that we have to live the way that we want to live? And Lisa, I see you leading the front on the particular issue of what is our relationship with our brain and how can we impact that so that we do feel like we're living the way that we want to be living, and this is a reductive word, but alert in the way that we want to be, alive or vibrant in the way that we want to be. So if you were to say, one general sweeping thing to people who are like, but what about my brain? What about my, parents' legacy? What is this going to happen to me? What do you want to leave us with?
Sharp Again is here to empower everyone to live a long life with a healthy brain. So we have information and programs to help people do that. And we are here for everyone. We will meet you where you are. And we just want people to understand that they have resources and that we are here for you, and that it's up to each individual, as you said, Nina, to make the decision about how much control, let's say, or maybe that's not the right word, but how much they want to start trying to attend to things that they know deep inside are not working quite right. Um, and again, most of the things that are on our list of causes are things that we either have control over or we can have treated. And so if you've had a life of not sleeping well, or you felt fatigue for a long time, you've had trauma that's not addressed, I guess my parting words are, if you care about your brain and you want to live a happier life, I'd suggest getting those things addressed.
And Lisa, where can people find you? What is your website again for Sharp Again? Is
Sharpagain.org.
okay, great.
We're a nonprofit.
Okay. We are so grateful for your expertise and your time with us today. It's just a privilege to have you with us. And thank God you and Nina knew each other.
Well, it's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everybody.